You know, sometimes life surprises you in the quietest, most heartbreaking ways. Before I tell you what happened, I just want to say, thank you for being here with me tonight. It means more than you know. Go ahead and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing the little towns and big cities pop up. Denver, Tampa, Des Moines, I see you all. And if you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Not because I asked you to, but because what I'm about to share might just make you feel something you haven't felt in a long time. So here's the story of how I thought my son had forgotten about me, until he showed up one rainy evening with a letter that changed everything. It was late March, one of those evenings where the light lingers just long enough to remind you winter's not quite ready to leave. The air smelled like wet pine and the faint sweetness of my neighbor's magnolia tree. I'd just finished washing the dinner dishes, meatloaf and mashed potatoes for one again, and I was drying my hands on that old checkered towel that used to belong to my mother. My house was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator. That's the kind of silence that wraps around you when you live alone. It's not peaceful, it's heavy. I hadn't seen my son, Daniel, in nearly 3 years. We talked a few times, birthdays and holidays mostly, the kind of polite conversations that skimmed the surface but never dived deeper. He was busy building his life in Chicago, he'd say. A job at an architecture firm, a girlfriend named Rachel. Although I wasn't sure if that had lasted. I didn't want to pry, and he didn't offer much. That was our dance, unspoken and awkward, like two people who loved each other but had forgotten how to show it. That evening I was sitting by the window, the one that faces the old oak tree out front. I sipped my tea, scrolling aimlessly through photos on my phone, when the doorbell rang. It startled me. I don't get visitors. I almost didn't answer, but when I looked through the glass panel, my heart skipped. Daniel stood there, soaked from the rain, holding something in his hand. A letter. Not a package or a bag, just a single white envelope, damp around the edges. For a moment, I froze. I wanted to open the door right away, run to him, throw my arms around him, like I used to when he was little. But I didn't. Instead, I opened it slowly, my voice trembling. Daniel? What on earth? Are you okay? He looked older. Tired, maybe. His hair had gotten longer, curling slightly at the back of his neck, and there was stubble on his face. His eyes, those same gray-green eyes he got from his father, looked uncertain. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he entered, bringing the smell of rain and city air with him. He set the envelope on the table, like it was something fragile, and then rubbed his hands together to warm them. "I wasn't sure if you'd be home," he said. "I'm always home," I replied, and instantly regretted how lonely that sounded. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. I poured him tea, just like I used to, and we both watched the steam rise between us. There were so many words I wanted to say. How much I missed him. How many nights I'd prayed he'd call. How proud I was of him. But they all got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. He reached for the envelope. "I brought you something. I didn't know if I should mail it, but I wanted to give it to you in person." I hesitated. "What is it?" "It's from Dad." Those words hit me like a wave. His father, my ex-husband, had passed away last year. We hadn't spoken in nearly a decade before that. He'd moved on, started a new family. When he died, Daniel went to the funeral. I didn't. I told myself I didn't need closure, but the truth is, I was too afraid to face the past. Daniel slid the letter across the table, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The envelope was yellowed at the corners, the handwriting unmistakable. Michael's. "He wrote it before he died," Daniel said quietly. "He asked me to give it to you when I thought the time was right." I stared at the envelope, tracing the edges with my fingers. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the rain outside. "Why now?" I'd whispered. He took a deep breath. "Because I think you need to read it, and maybe I needed to be here when you did." I nodded slowly. The room felt smaller somehow, the air thick with things unsaid. I opened the envelope carefully, pulling out a single folded sheet. His handwriting was just as I remembered, sharp and deliberate, but softer now, as if time had gentled his hand. As I read, my eyes blurred with tears I didn't expect. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years. Regret, love, apologies that came too late. He wrote about the things he wished he'd done differently, how he wished he'd tried harder to keep our family together, how proud he was of Daniel. And then there was a part for me, words that I hadn't realized I needed to hear until that moment. "I never stopped caring for you," he'd written. "I just didn't know how to love you the right way." By the time I reached the end, I could barely breathe. The letter slipped from my hands, landing softly on the table. Daniel was watching me, his eyes glistening. "I didn't know he'd written that," he said quietly. "He gave it to me right before he passed. I didn't know if I should bring it. I didn't want to hurt you." I wiped my tears and reached across the table, taking his hand. "You didn't hurt me, sweetheart. You brought me something I didn't even know I needed." We sat there for a long time, just holding hands, the rain whispering against the window. In that silence, something shifted. The distance between us, the years of misunderstanding and silence, started to fade, replaced by something tender and real. Later, when he stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Mom," he said softly, "I think I forgot how much I missed this place." I smiled through my tears. "You can always come back, Daniel. You never stopped being home here." After he left, I sat back at the table, the letter resting beside my cup of cold tea. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty this time. The letter wasn't just a message from the past. It was a bridge between me and Michael, between me and Daniel. That night, as the rain slowed and the moonlight broke through the clouds, I realized something. Sometimes the people we think have forgotten us are just finding their way back in their own time. And sometimes love doesn't fade, it just waits. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, I felt whole. And that was enough. You know that feeling when you wake up after a long night of crying? Your eyes are puffy, your head feels heavy, but your heart feels a little lighter. That's how I woke up the next morning after Daniel's visit. I sat there at the edge of my bed, sunlight spilling through the curtains, the world feeling both softer and sharper all at once. And before I go any further, I want to pause and thank all of you who've been watching and listening to my story. You've made this space feel less lonely. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? I love reading your comments. From small towns to big cities, each one feels like a little light flickering back at me. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. Maybe hit that like button too. Not for the numbers, but because maybe this story is reminding you of something, or someone, you've loved and lost. Anyway, that morning I sat at the table where Daniel and I had shared tea the night before. The letter was still there, lying next to a half-burned candle and an empty mug. I picked it up again, tracing the creases with my fingers. The paper smelled faintly of old ink and cedar. Michael always used to keep cedar boxes for everything, even his letters. Funny how scents can drag you through time. I read it again, slower this time. Every line felt heavier. "I never stopped caring for you," he had written. "I just didn't know how to love you the right way." Those words wouldn't leave me. They echoed in my chest like an old song that suddenly made sense. And just like that, all those years came rushing back. The laughter, the arguments, the cold silences that stretched for days. We'd married young, too young maybe, and built a life out of hope and stubbornness. But somewhere along the way, the walls went up. He worked late. I kept the home running. We stopped talking about the small things, and then the big ones. And when it all finally broke, we pretended it didn't hurt as much as it did. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke my thoughts. When I looked out the window, I saw Daniel's old truck. He hadn't driven that thing in years. I rushed to the door, half surprised, half afraid. He stepped out, holding a grocery bag in one arm and a coffee in the other. "Thought you might need breakfast," he said, smiling in that shy way he used to when he was a kid. I laughed, though my throat tightened. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, shrugging, "but I wanted to." He came inside, setting everything down on the counter. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries filled the kitchen. It was such a small, ordinary thing, but it felt extraordinary. I hadn't shared a morning with him like this in years. We sat together, buttering croissants and sipping coffee. It started quiet, but then little by little, the conversation opened up. He told me about his life in Chicago, the long work hours, the loneliness, the feeling that something was missing. He said he'd been thinking about moving somewhere quieter, maybe back home. I tried to keep my voice steady. "You mean here?" He smiled. "Maybe. I don't know. I miss this. I miss you." That's when the tears came again, uninvited but honest. I reached over and touched his cheek, just like I used to when he was small. "You have no idea how much I've missed hearing that." He nodded, his voice low. I think I forgot how to say it. We spent the rest of the morning sorting through old photo albums. Daniel laughed at the one where he was missing his front teeth, holding a fishing pole twice his size. We even found one of me and Michael, standing by the lake in our 20s, sunburned, smiling, full of dreams. Daniel picked it up and studied it. "You two looked happy," he said. "We were," I whispered. "Once." "Do you ever think about him?" "All the time, but not the way I used to. It's like the anger faded, and what's left is just gratitude that we shared what we did, even if it didn't last." He nodded slowly, setting the photo down. "He wanted to talk to you before he passed, you know. He told me he didn't think you'd want to see him." I felt my chest tighten. He was right. I wasn't ready then. "But you are now." I looked at the letter again. Maybe I am. Maybe it took this long to forgive both of us. We spent hours just talking, really talking, for the first time in years. About his childhood, his father, the things we both carried in silence. The sun had moved high into the sky before we realized how long we'd been sitting there. Later that afternoon, Daniel said he wanted to visit his father's old house, the one 2 towns over that Michael had lived in with his second wife. I hadn't been there since before the divorce. The thought of it twisted something in me, but when Daniel asked if I wanted to come, I surprised myself by saying yes. The drive was quiet. The road wound through golden fields and bare oak trees, the kind of landscape that hums with memories. Daniel drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the letter he brought. When we pulled into the old driveway, I almost didn't recognize the place. The paint was peeling, and the garden was wild, but it still carried a piece of him. Daniel got out first, walking slowly toward the porch. I followed, my heart pounding. Inside, everything smelled faintly of dust and cedar. Michael's things were still there, the old armchair, the bookshelves, even that ridiculous lamp he'd insisted on keeping. And then Daniel led me to a small wooden box on the mantel. "He kept this for you," Daniel said. "I found it after he died. I didn't open it. I thought you should." My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of small things, a seashell from our honeymoon, a faded movie ticket, a photograph of me holding baby Daniel, and a small note in his handwriting. It read, "If she ever sees this, tell her I never stopped believing in her." I stood there, tears spilling freely, my fingers brushing the objects like they were holy. Daniel put his arm around me, and I leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Mom," he whispered, "I think he really did love you, in his own way." "I know," I said softly, "and maybe that's enough now." When we left, the sky had begun to glow with the colors of dusk, gold and rose and quiet gray. I felt something lift from me, something I didn't realize I'd been carrying for years. On the drive home, Daniel turned to me and said, "I think coming back here was the right choice." I smiled at him, tears drying on my cheeks. It was, for both of us. That night, as I sat by the window again, I felt a strange peace. Life had taken so much, but it had also given me this small chance to heal, to reconnect, to begin again. And I realized that sometimes love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. You ever notice how life has a way of circling back to the places you thought you'd left behind? I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Before I go on, I just want to say, thank you for still being here, listening to this story. You've made these nights feel less lonely for me. Tell me again, where are you watching from tonight? I love seeing familiar names pop up, from San Diego to Savannah, from small Midwest towns to the heart of New York City. You all feel like friends gathered around my kitchen table. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe or tap that little like button, not for me, but for the stories that remind us that love and forgiveness can still surprise us, no matter our age. It had been a week since Daniel came home with that letter. The days that followed felt different. Not brighter exactly, but fuller. Like the world had regained some quiet pulse I'd forgotten how to hear. Daniel stayed with me for a few days. He worked remotely from the dining room table, his laptop surrounded by coffee cups and papers, while I busied myself in the kitchen. Sometimes I'd catch him glancing up, smiling, like he was still trying to believe we were both really there. One morning, as I was folding laundry, he came in with his phone in hand. "Mom," he said, "Rachel called. She wants to come by this weekend." I froze for a second. I'd never met Rachel, only heard her name in passing. Their relationship had always seemed distant. I wasn't sure if that was because of him or her. "Oh," I said, forcing a smile. "That's nice." He looked hesitant. "I think she's part of the reason I came home. Things between us have been complicated." I nodded. They usually are. He laughed quietly. "You and Dad made it look easy when I was a kid." "Trust me," I said, folding a towel. "It wasn't." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then softly, "I know." The weekend came faster than I expected. Saturday morning arrived with a soft drizzle, the kind that makes everything smell like fresh earth. I was making cinnamon rolls, my small attempt to make things feel warm and welcoming, when a car pulled into the driveway. Rachel stepped out, holding an umbrella. She was lovely. Tall, dark hair tucked behind her ears, a calm presence about her. When she came in, she smiled politely, but there was something guarded in her eyes. "It's so nice to finally meet you," I said, drying my hands on a towel. "You too, Mrs. Hart." "Oh, please call me Anne." We sat around the table, the three of us, sipping coffee and pretending not to notice the tension that floated just beneath the surface. Daniel kept glancing between us, as if worried one of us might say the wrong thing. After a while, Rachel set her cup down and said, "Daniel told me about the letter." I nodded. It was unexpected. "I'm glad he gave it to you," she said quietly. "He's been carrying that around for months. It was eating at him." Daniel gave her a look, half warning, half grateful. I could tell there was more behind those words than she was saying. Later, when Daniel went to take a phone call, Rachel and I were left alone in the kitchen. The rain tapped gently on the window, and for a moment we just listened to it. Then she said, "He's been struggling, you know." My heart tightened. With what? Everything. The job, his dad's death, feeling like he doesn't belong anywhere. He tries to stay busy, but he's been lost. I swallowed hard. I suppose I should have known. She looked at me, her expression softening. He blames himself for a lot of things, for how far he drifted from you. He doesn't say it, but it's there. I took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling on me. And what about you? Are you part of what's keeping him here, or what's pulling him away? Rachel hesitated, her eyes glistening just slightly. Maybe both. There was honesty in her voice, raw and uncertain. I respected that. When Daniel came back in, I changed the subject. We spent the afternoon baking and talking, the rain turning to mist outside. Every so often I'd catch Daniel looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Maybe he was. That night, after Rachel had gone to bed in the guest room, Daniel and I sat in the living room with a small fire crackling in the fireplace. The letter still sat on the mantel. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, "do you ever regret it? Leaving Dad?" I stared into the fire for a long time before answering. I used to. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I thought maybe if I'd stayed, things would have turned out differently. He nodded slowly. He regretted it too. He told me once that he wished he'd fought harder. I believe that. I said softly. But sometimes love isn't about fighting harder. Sometimes it's about knowing when to stop hurting each other. He looked thoughtful. I don't think I ever understood that until now. We sat in silence for a while, the fire popping softly. Then he said something that surprised me. "I think I might move back here. Not forever, maybe, but for a while." My heart fluttered. "You mean that?" "Yeah, there's a lot I've been running from. Maybe it's time to stop." Tears welled in my eyes, but I smiled. "I'd like that, Daniel. More than you know." The next morning, Rachel joined us for breakfast. The air felt lighter somehow, the tension from before replaced by quiet understanding. She helped me in the kitchen, and we talked like old friends about gardening, old movies, the little things that make life softer. When Daniel went out to get more coffee, she turned to me and said, "He needs this, you know, being here, with you. He doesn't say it, but this place feels like home to him again." I nodded. It feels like home again to me, too. That afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds, we all went out to the garden. The ground was damp, the air fresh. Daniel picked up a shovel and started turning the soil where my old rose bushes used to grow. Rachel knelt beside him, her laughter blending with his. I stood on the porch watching them, a quiet warmth blooming in my chest. For the first time in years, my house wasn't filled with silence. It was filled with life. Later that evening, when the light faded and the stars began to appear, I found myself back at the window, the one that looked out over the oak tree. I thought of Michael then, not with bitterness, but with peace. Maybe this was what his letter had meant to do. To remind me that love, in all its forms, has a way of finding us again, even after we think it's gone. I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Michael." And for a moment, I could almost feel him there, in the soft glow of the evening, in the laughter echoing down the hall, in the home that finally felt alive again. Before I tell you how it all ended, let me just pause and say how grateful I am that you're still here, listening. It's been such a journey, hasn't it? These memories, these moments, they've become something more than just a story to me. They've become a reminder that love, forgiveness, and family never truly fade away. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing your messages. Maybe you're in Arizona, maybe in Maine, maybe right here in the Midwest like me. Wherever you are, thank you for keeping me company through this story. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe and give the video a like. It helps this little corner of the world stay alive, one story at a time. It was late May when everything finally came full circle. The lilacs in the yard were in full bloom, their scent drifting through the open windows, mingling with the sound of birds and the hum of an old radio playing soft country music. Daniel had been staying with me for nearly a month by then, working remotely during the day, fixing things around the house on weekends. The creaky door, the leaky faucet, the porch light that hadn't worked in years. He'd touched them all, as if by mending the house, he was mending something between us too. Rachel had been coming by often, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just for a walk down the old dirt road behind the house. The three of us had fallen into a kind of rhythm. There were still silences, of course. Some memories don't disappear just because you talk about them, but they weren't painful anymore. They were gentle, familiar. One morning, Daniel came into the kitchen while I was whisking eggs. His hair was a mess, and he was wearing that old flannel shirt his father used to love. "Morning, sleepyhead?" I teased. "Coffee's on the counter." He smiled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Thanks, Mom." There was something different about him that morning, something quieter, more certain. He poured his coffee and leaned against the counter. "Rachel and I talked last night," he said. "We're going to stay." I froze mid-whisk. "Stay? You mean here?" He nodded. "Yeah. There's a firm opening an office nearby. They offered me a position. I think it's time I stop running." My chest tightened, that familiar ache of joy and disbelief mixing all at once. "Are you sure, Daniel? I don't want you to feel like you have to stay for me." He smiled. "It's not for you, Mom. It's because of you. Because this place, us, it feels like home again." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just reached out and hugged him, holding on tighter than I meant to. "Your father would be so proud," I'd whispered. He pulled back, eyes glistening. "I think he'd want this too." That weekend, we decided to plant a new garden in the backyard. It had been years since I'd had the heart for it. The soil had gone dry, the weeds had taken over, but Daniel cleared it out with steady hands, and Rachel knelt beside me, gently pressing seeds into the earth. We planted roses, of course, Michael's favorite. And when the sun began to set, painting the sky in those deep oranges and purples that always make me think of him, Daniel placed a small wooden box at the edge of the garden. It was Michael's box, the one we'd found in his old house. Inside, we placed his note, the seashell, the photograph of baby Daniel. I watched as Daniel knelt and buried it beneath a new rose bush. "For him," he said softly. I nodded, my voice trembling. "For him, and for us." We stood there for a long time, the three of us, watching the light fade. The air smelled of lilacs and earth, and for the first time in so many years, the world felt whole again. Later that evening, after Rachel and Daniel went inside, I stayed out on the porch. The moon was rising, silver and soft, the night calm except for the distant call of an owl. I sat there with a blanket over my shoulders, a cup of tea in my hands, and I thought about the letter. About how something as small as a folded piece of paper had changed everything. It had brought my son back to me. It had given me closure I didn't know I needed, and it had reminded me that life doesn't always offer second chances, but sometimes if your heart stays open long enough, it surprises you with one anyway. Daniel came back out a few minutes later, 2 mugs of cocoa in his hands. "Couldn't let you sit out here alone," he said, sitting beside me. I smiled. Old habits die hard. He looked out over the yard. The garden shimmered faintly under the moonlight. "You know," he said quietly,